The little girl screamed his name. Not his title. Not his company name. Not Sir or Mr. the way strangers always said it with that careful, nervous distance. She screamed his actual name, the name only 3 people on earth knew to call him. The name his mother used to whisper when she tucked him in at night before everything went wrong. And the name had been dead for 23 years. The motorcade stopped. 6 black SUVs, bulletproof glass, 12 security personnel, a schedule worth $40 million per hour. All of it froze on the most important street in the most important city in the country because a 4-year-old girl standing alone on a sidewalk with no shoes on her feet screamed a dead man's name into the cold morning air. The head of security, a former Marine named Douglas who had never in 11 years of service seen his employer react to anything with anything other than total stillness, watched through the front windshield as the door to the middle vehicle opened from the inside. Douglas grabbed his radio. He said, "Do not move. Do not approach. Stay in position." He said it 3 times. Then he got out of his own vehicle and walked toward the open door because something in the air felt the way the air feels before lightning strikes. Charged, heavy, wrong. The billionaire was already standing on the sidewalk. He was not looking at his phone. He was not speaking into his earpiece. He was not doing the 1,000 things he was always doing simultaneously. The man who ran 4 companies, who had not taken a day off in 6 years, who once conducted a board meeting from a hospital bed 40 minutes after surgery. That man was standing completely still on a public sidewalk staring at a small child. The little girl stared back at him. She was holding something. Douglas could not see what it was from where he stood. He could only see the child, tiny, barefoot, wearing a yellow dress that was 2 sizes too big, her dark hair wet and plastered flat against her forehead. Her eyes enormous and locked on the billionaire's face with the kind of intensity that looked wrong on a 4-year-old. The kind of focus that belonged to someone much older, someone who had been waiting a very long time. The billionaire crouched down to her level. He said something Douglas could not hear. The little girl held out what she was holding. And the billionaire's hands, the hands that had signed billion-dollar contracts without trembling, that had shaken the hands of presidents without flinching, those hands started to shake. He took the object from her. He looked at it. He looked at her face. He looked at the object again. And then the most powerful man in the country sat down on a public sidewalk in his $5,000 suit and pressed the object against his chest and closed his eyes. Douglas had his hand on his radio. He had no idea what to say into it. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. And somewhere, several blocks away, a woman watched all of it through the lens of a camera she was not supposed to have, filming a moment she was not supposed to witness, with a secret she had been running from for 4 years finally catching up to her. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart beating faster, do yourself a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone you love. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think is in that little girl's hand. Because what comes next is going to destroy you in the best possible way. Now let's go back. His name, his real name, the name the little girl screamed, was Cole. Not Callum Voss, the name on every Forbes cover for the past 9 years. Not Mr. Voss, the name that made senators straighten their ties. Not CV, the shorthand his employees used in hushed corridors when they were afraid he might be listening. Cole. Just Cole. A boy's name. A name that belonged to someone who no longer existed. Callum Voss had buried Cole a long time ago. He buried him the same night he buried his mother. It was important to understand who Callum Voss was before the morning everything changed, because the version of him that most people knew, the version in the magazines, the version in the news segments, the version that made other billionaires feel small, that version was only half a person. It was the half that had survived. The other half had been left in a hospital corridor in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 23 years ago, when a 17-year-old boy sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights and a doctor walked toward him with that specific, terrible slowness that meant the news was not good. His mother had worked 3 jobs. She cleaned offices at night, she worked a register at a pharmacy in the mornings, and on weekends she altered clothes for a dry cleaner 2 bus rides away. She did all of this so that Cole could stay in school, could stay fed, could have the kind of life she had not been able to give herself. She had never once complained. She had never once made him feel like a burden. Every morning she kissed his forehead and told him the same thing. Be somebody, baby. Be so big the world can't ignore you. She died of a heart condition she had known about for 2 years and told nobody, least of all him, because she did not want him to worry, and because the medication would have cost money she did not have. Cole became Callum that night. He graduated high school, got a scholarship, got a second scholarship, worked while he studied, slept 4 hours a night for 5 years, built his first company from a single laptop and a storage unit he was illegally living in, sold it, built another one, sold it for more, and then built the one that made him what he was, unstoppable, untouchable, unreachable. He was 40 years old. He had not cried since that hospital corridor. He had not let anyone call him Cole since that night. He had never told anyone. Not a business partner, not a board member, not the 2 women he had briefly let close enough to call a relationship. He had never told anyone his real name. And a 4-year-old girl with no shoes had just screamed it on a public sidewalk. Douglas finally reached him. He crouched down beside his employer and spoke quietly and carefully, the way you speak to someone who might be in shock. He said, "Sir, we need to get back in the vehicle." He said, "Sir, we have the Geneva meeting in 40 minutes. He said, "Sir, please tell me what is happening right now." Callum looked up at him. His eyes were dry. His face was the same controlled, unreadable mask it always was. But his hands were still shaking, and Douglas had been with this man through hostile takeovers and public scandals and a very credible assassination threat in Dubai, and he had never seen those hands shake. The little girl had not moved. She stood 2 feet away, watching Callum with those enormous, patient eyes, like she had known he would be here, like she had planned for this exact moment, like she was 4 years old and 40 years old at the same time. Callum looked at the object in his hands. It was a photograph, old, printed on actual photo paper, the way people used to print pictures before everything became digital and disposable. The edges were soft from handling, the corners bent, the surface worn in the center where fingers had touched it hundreds of times. It showed 2 people. A woman in her late 30s, laughing, her head thrown back, her arm around a teenage boy who was trying not to smile and failing. They were standing in front of a small house. There were flowers in a window box. The sky behind them was the specific shade of gold that only exists for about 7 minutes on summer evenings. The woman was his mother. The teenage boy was him, Cole, age 16, 2 years before she died. He turned the photograph over. On the back, in handwriting he did not recognize, someone had written 4 words. "She knows the truth." Callum stood up. He looked at the little girl. He said very quietly, "Where did you get this?" The little girl said, "My mama gave it to me. She said if I ever got lost I should find the man in the picture and show him and he would help me." Callum said, "Where is your mama right now?" The little girl's face changed. The enormous patience in her eyes cracked, just slightly, and underneath it was something raw and frightened and very, very young. She said, "I don't know. She was right behind me and then she wasn't there anymore and I've been waiting and waiting and she doesn't come back." Callum looked at Douglas. Douglas was already on his radio. The $40 million schedule evaporated. The Geneva meeting, the conference call with Tokyo, the ribbon-cutting ceremony that had been planned for 6 months. All of it dissolved like it had never existed. Callum Voss, who had not altered his schedule for anything in 6 years, who had once flown across an ocean with 103-degree fever rather than cancel a meeting, crouched back down in front of the little girl and said, "What is your name?" She said, "Lily." He said, "Lily, my name is Callum. I'm going to help you find your mama. Is that okay?" Lily looked at him for a long moment with those ancient, patient eyes. Then she reached out and took his hand, his large, still trembling hand, in both of her small ones, and she said, "Okay, Callum," and the word sounded exactly the way his mother used to say it, with that same soft Pittsburgh vowel flattened at the back, that same particular music, and something inside Callum Voss that had been locked for 23 years shifted. Not broke, not opened, just shifted, like a door that has been sealed for a very long time, moving a single inch. He stood up. He kept hold of her hand. He walked back to the motorcade. Douglas followed, saying nothing, understanding for the first time in 11 years that he was in the middle of something that had nothing to do with business. They took Lily to Callum's building. Not his office, his building. The 47-story tower in Midtown that had his name on the outside and his apartment on the top 3 floors and his various companies occupying everything in between. He had bought it 12 years ago and renovated the residential portion himself, personally approving every detail, which struck most people as unusual for a man of his stature until they understood that for a boy who had grown up with almost nothing, the ability to design the exact space where he slept was not a luxury. It was something else, something deeper, something closer to proof. The security team swept the lobby. His assistant, a hyper-competent woman named Patricia who had been with him for 8 years and who prided herself on having anticipated every possible scenario, was standing at the elevator with a tablet and a carefully neutral expression when Callum walked in holding the hand of a barefoot child in an oversized yellow dress. Patricia looked at the child. She looked at Callum. She said, "Good morning." Callum said, "Cancel everything today." Patricia said, "Everything." He said, "Everything." She said, "The Geneva." He said, "Everything, Patricia." She typed something on her tablet. She did not ask any questions. This was one of the many reasons Callum paid her what he paid her. They went up in the elevator. Lily held Callum's hand the whole way up and did not speak, but she was looking at everything. The marble walls, the polished brass, the reflection of herself in the mirrored ceiling, with a focus and seriousness that made Callum feel strangely observed, like being watched by a small scientist. The apartment was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides, the city spread out below like a map of everything possible. Callum had never really thought about how it looked until the moment he saw it through the eyes of a 4-year-old who had been standing alone on a sidewalk 20 minutes ago. He watched Lily walk to the window and press both palms against the glass and look down at the city far below, and he thought about his mother's house in Pittsburgh, the small house in the photograph, the window box with flowers, and something moved through him like weather. He had Lily sit on the couch. He got her water and crackers because those were the only things in his kitchen that seemed appropriate for a child, and he made a mental note that he needed better things in his kitchen, and then he caught himself making that mental note and set it aside because it implied a permanence he did not yet understand. He sat across from her. He looked at her face carefully, the way he looked at contracts, searching for the thing underneath the surface language. She had dark eyes, very dark, almost black, with that same quality of patience and intelligence that had struck him on the sidewalk. Her skin was a warm, deep brown. Her hair was thick and would have been curly if it were not wet. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow, faint, old, the kind children get from falling and never remember falling. She looked nothing like his mother. She looked nothing like him. There was no physical reason for the photograph to exist, for his name to be in this child's history. And yet, he picked up the photograph from where he had set it on the coffee table. He looked at the back again. She knows the truth. He said to Lily, "Do you know what your mama's name is?" Lily said, "Mama." He almost smiled. He said, "Okay. Do you know your last name? Your family name?" Lily thought about this very seriously. She said, "Lily Grace Beaumont. That's my whole name." The name meant nothing to him. He filed it away. He said, "Do you know where you live?" She said, "In our apartment. It has a blue door." He said, "Do you remember the street?" She said, "The street with the big tree that got hurt in the storm. One of its arms fell off." He made a note of this, knowing it was the kind of detail that was actually useful. A distinctive landmark, a broken tree, a blue door. Cities were full of addresses. Cities had very few broken trees with fallen limbs right outside buildings with blue doors. Douglas appeared in the doorway. He said quietly, "We've checked the immediate area. No woman matching any description. No report of a missing adult in the vicinity." He said, "We can bring in more resources." Callum said, "Do it." Quietly. Douglas said, "And the child?" Callum looked at Lily, who had finished her crackers and was now examining the city through the window again with those serious scientist eyes. He said, "She stays here until we find her mother." Douglas said nothing. Callum said, "Is there a problem?" Douglas said, "No, sir." He said it the way people say something when there is very definitely a problem but they have correctly assessed that this is not the moment to raise it. He left. Callum sat back. He looked at the photograph again. He thought about the handwriting on the back. Not his mother's handwriting. He knew his mother's handwriting like he knew his own heartbeat. She had left him notes his whole childhood. Small folded pieces of paper in his lunchbox and his jacket pockets with things like "Proud of you today" and "You can do anything." He had kept every one of them. They were in a box in a closet he never opened. The only things he had kept from before. This was not his mother's handwriting. This was someone else's. someone who had known his mother, someone who had known his real name, someone who had known about that summer evening with the golden sky. There were almost no candidates. His mother had not had family, not really. She had been estranged from her own parents since before he was born. A rift she never fully explained and he had stopped asking about by the time he was 12. She had had friends, colleagues, the loose networks of people who build their lives around work and necessity rather than leisure and choice, but no one close enough to hold that particular photograph, to know that particular name. No one he could think of. He looked at Lily. Lily looked back at him. She said, "You're thinking very hard." He said, "Yes." She said, "My mama makes that same face when she's thinking hard. She gets a line right here." She touched the spot between her own eyebrows. Callum touched the same spot on his own face. He was not aware he had a line there. He said, "Lily, how did you end up on that street this morning? Can you tell me what happened?" Lily pulled her knees up to her chest. This was the first time she had made herself small, the first defensive gesture, and it told him that the morning had been frightening in ways she was working hard not to show. She said, "We were walking." She said, "Mama had her big bag, the one she always takes when we go somewhere important." She said it was important today. She said today was the day. He said, "The day for what?" Lily said, "She didn't say. She just said today is the day, baby," and she sounded like she was scared but trying not to be scared. And then she held my hand really tight and we were walking and then there was a lot of noise and people moving fast and she told me to stay right there, right on that spot, and she said, "If anyone scares you, find the man from the picture," and she put the picture in my hand and then she went. Her voice did not break. She was 4 years old and she was holding herself together with a precision that was almost painful to watch. Callum said, "A lot of noise." "What kind of noise?" She said, "Like when something falls. A big crashing sound. And then people were running." He said, "And you stayed right on that spot." She said, "Mama said stay. So I stayed. But then a long time passed and I got cold and I started to call for her and she didn't come." She said her small voice had not changed at all. Still level. Still careful. Callum looked at Douglas, who had reappeared silently in the doorway. Douglas shook his head slightly, meaning he had heard, meaning no leads yet. Callum said to Lily, "You were very brave this morning." Lily looked at him steadily and said, "I wasn't brave. I was scared. But Mama says being scared and doing the right thing anyway is what brave actually is." The room was completely quiet. Callum Voss sat very still. He thought about a teenage boy in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights, terrified, doing the next necessary thing because there was no one else to do it. He said, "Your mama sounds like a very smart woman." Lily said, "She's the smartest person in the world. Except maybe you." She said, "You were very smart." She said, "You built things." He said, "She told you about me." Lily's expression shifted. Something careful moved through it. A child editing herself, understanding that she had said something that maybe she was not supposed to say. She said, "A little bit. Not very much." He said, "It's okay. You can tell me what she said." Lily considered this with that extraordinary seriousness. Then she said, "You used to know each other a long time ago. She said you were good once. She said she hoped you were still good. She hoped you were still good." 23 years of careful construction, of controlled surfaces and calculated distance, of being exactly and only what he had decided to become, and a 4-year-old delivered the verdict on all of it in 11 words. He said, "I'm going to do everything I can to find your mama, Lily. I promise you." She looked at him. She nodded slowly, like someone accepting terms, like she was deciding to trust him. It occurred to him that no one had trusted him in a very long time. Not really. Not the way this child was trusting him, with everything, with no leverage, with no exit strategy. People trusted Callum Voss with their money, their deals, their professional futures. Nobody trusted him the way a 4-year-old trusts a stranger she has decided is safe. It was the most terrifying thing anyone had done to him in years. 2 miles away, in a coffee shop bathroom, a woman named Nadia Beaumont was sitting on the floor with her back against the door, and her phone in her hand and blood on her sleeve that was not hers. She was 34 years old. She was breathing in counts of 4 the way her therapist had taught her 3 years ago when she had still been able to afford a therapist. She had a large duffel bag between her knees and both her arms wrapped around it, and she was not letting go of that bag for anything. Her phone showed 14 missed calls. Every single one was from the same number. A number she had been avoiding for 4 years. A number she had changed her own number 3 times trying to escape. A number that had found her every single time. She had known this morning that it was ending. One way or another, today was the last day of running. She had packed the bag 2 weeks ago, had rehearsed the route, had rehearsed what she would say, had told Lily the plan in the only way you can tell a 4-year-old a plan. In pieces, in stories, in the language of if this happens then we do this. She had not expected the man on the corner. She had not expected him to be right there, right on that block, right at that moment, thick-necked and still and watching her with that professional emptiness that she had learned to recognize the way animals learn to recognize predators. She had not expected him to move that fast. She had done the only thing she could do. She had pressed the photograph into Lily's hand. She had said the words she had practiced. She had pointed at the motorcade that was passing at that exact moment. The motorcade she had chosen that specific street to intersect with because she had known it would be passing at that time, because she had planned for this, because planning was the only thing that had kept her alive for 4 years, and she had said, "Go to the man in the picture if you get lost." Then she had run. Not away from her daughter. Toward the man who was following her. Drawing him away from Lily. Taking the danger with her and leaving her child with the only person she had ever believed might be safe. She had not been sure he would stop. She had hoped. She had calculated odds the way she calculated everything, methodically, without sentiment. He would either stop or he wouldn't. If he stopped, Lily was safe. If he didn't stop, then she had failed at the one thing that mattered more than her own life, and she could not think about that, so she did not think about it. She had run 6 blocks. She had lost the man with the thick neck in a crowd outside a hotel. She had ducked into this coffee shop, into this bathroom, and she had been here for 40 minutes. She pulled up a different screen on her phone. A news feed she had bookmarked. She searched for Callum Voss. The first result was from 11 minutes ago. It showed a photograph, grainy, taken on someone's phone from across the street, of the stopped motorcade and, barely visible, the figure of a large man in a dark suit crouched down on the sidewalk in front of a small child in a yellow dress. Nadia Beaumont closed her eyes. A sound came out of her that was not quite a breath and not quite a sob, something in between, something that had been held inside a very long time. He had stopped. He had her. Lily was safe. Now Nadia had to figure out how to stay alive long enough to get back to her daughter and do what she had come here to do, which was tell Callum Voss a truth that was going to change everything he thought he knew about his own life. She stood up. She checked her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She looked terrible. She looked like someone who had been running for 4 years and had not slept in 3 days and had been scared so many times the fear had become a kind of background noise, always there, almost easy to ignore. She squared her shoulders. She pressed her forehead against the cool mirror for just a moment, one moment of allowing herself to be tired, and then she lifted her head, and she was Nadia Beaumont again, the woman who had survived, who had planned, who had gotten this far. She opened the bathroom door. She took out her phone. She called the only number she had been more afraid to call than the one with 14 missed calls. It rang twice. Callum Voss answered on the second ring. She had not heard his voice in 4 years. It was lower than she remembered, more controlled, like everything soft had been sanded away. He said, "I was wondering when you'd call." She said, "Is she safe?" He said, "She's eating crackers and telling me my apartment doesn't have enough color." The laugh that came out of Nadia was mostly air, mostly relief, the kind of laugh that is really just a body releasing something it has been holding at great cost. She said, "That sounds right." He said, "You want to tell me who you are and why my dead mother is in a photograph in your 4-year-old's hand." The lightness evaporated. She said, "Not on the phone." He said, "Then come here." She said, "There's someone watching me." Or there was. "I think I lost him, but I'm not sure." A pause. She heard him moving. She heard him say something to someone else, his voice dropping below what she could make out. He came back on. He said, "I'm sending a car. A black sedan, not the SUVs. License plate ending in 774. The driver's name is Marcus. He will say the word Pittsburgh when he finds you. Nobody else will know where you're going." She breathed. She said, "You're very good at this." He said, "I built things. That's what she told you I do, right?" Nadia was quiet. He said, "She also said I used to know you." I don't remember you. Nadia said, you wouldn't. We never met. He said, then how do you have that photograph? She said, Callum, please. I will explain everything. Just please keep my daughter safe until I get there. Another pause. Longer. He said, nobody has called me that in a very long time. She said, I know. I'm sorry. The call ended. Nadia stood in the coffee shop doorway, scanning the street, reading every face, reading the spaces between faces, all the skills she had acquired that she had never wanted to acquire. She saw a woman with a stroller. She saw a delivery cyclist. She saw a man reading a newspaper that she looked at twice and then let go because he was genuinely reading it. She saw a black sedan 3 storefronts down, pulled forward. The window came down. The driver said, Pittsburgh. Nadia Beaumont got in the car. Callum was standing at the window when Patricia knocked and said the car was 12 minutes out. Behind him, on the couch, Lily had fallen asleep. It had happened very suddenly, the way children fall asleep. 1 minute she had been examining one of the architectural models on the shelf, asking him what each building was for with that exhausting and wonderful precision, and the next she was on the couch with her feet tucked under her and her cheek pressed against the cushion and her breathing slow and even. He had put a blanket over her. He had no idea where the blanket had come from. Patricia must have materialized it from somewhere. Patricia was exceptional at materializing things. He stood at the window and looked at the city. He had spent 23 years not thinking about Pittsburgh. He had built the not thinking into an architecture so solid it was indistinguishable from forgetting. He almost believed it himself most of the time. He almost believed that Callum Voss had always existed, that Cole had been a brief and separate person who had no claim on the man he had become. And then a 4-year-old screamed his name and the architecture showed its cracks. He thought about the photograph. He had been 16 in that picture. His mother had been, he did the math, 38. 6 years younger than he was right now. He was older now than his mother had ever been. This was a thought he came back to sometimes, in the rare quiet moments when his defenses were down, and it never got easier. He was 40 years old, and his mother had never been 40 years old. Be somebody, baby. He had tried. God help him, he had tried. But the thought that now attached itself to be somebody, the thought he had never allowed before, the thought that the morning had cracked loose from wherever he had sealed it, was the question of what she would think of who he had become. Not the Forbes covers. Not the companies. Not the buildings with his name on them. What she would think of him. Whether the man he was now was the man she had meant when she said be somebody. He heard the elevator open. He turned. Nadia Beaumont walked into his apartment. She was not what he had pictured. He had not let himself picture anything, but in the space between the phone call and this moment some part of his brain had assembled an image anyway. And whatever that image was, it was not this woman, this specific woman, with her dark eyes and her exhausted face and the way she stopped in the doorway and looked at him like someone who has been running toward a place for a very long time and is not entirely sure they are allowed to arrive. She was 34. She looked both older and younger than that, older in her eyes, younger in the way she was holding herself like a person bracing for impact. She was looking at him the way people look at things they have spent a long time knowing about but never seen. She said, "You look like her." He said, "I beg your pardon." She said, "Your mother." Around the eyes. "You have her eyes." The room became very quiet. He said, "How did you know my mother?" Nadia's gaze moved to the couch. She saw Lily sleeping. Something moved through her face. Relief and love and exhaustion all braided together. And she crossed the room and stood over her daughter and just looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned back to him. She said, "Can we sit down? This is going to take a while." He said, "I have nowhere to be." She almost smiled. She said, "That might be the first time you've said that in years." He said, "How would you know that?" She said, "Because I know quite a lot about you, Callum. I've been learning about you for a long time. And I need to tell you something that is going to make you angry, and then something that is going to confuse you, and then something that might break your heart, and I need you to stay in the room for all of it." He looked at her steadily. He said, "I have stayed in rooms through quite a lot of things." She said, "Not like this." He said, "Sit down. Tell me." And she did. Her name was Nadia Beaumont, born Nadia Holloway, and her mother had been called Grace. Grace Holloway had been a nurse in Pittsburgh. She had been, specifically, the overnight floor nurse on the cardiac ward of Mercy General Hospital in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 23 years ago. The same ward, the same night, when a woman named Margaret Cole had been brought in and had died before dawn of a heart condition that had been known and treatable and had not been treated because the medication cost $400 a month. Nadia said this and watched Callum's face. His face did not change. His hands, resting on his knees, went very still. She continued. Her mother Grace had been the nurse assigned to Margaret Cole that night. She had held Margaret's hand. She had listened to Margaret talk in those last hours the way dying people talk when they understand what is happening. Freely, without the usual editing, saying things they have held back for years. Margaret had talked about her son. She had talked about Cole. She had said his name like a prayer, like a promise, like a piece of herself she was leaving in the air. She had told Grace things about him. His stubbornness, his intelligence, his gift for building things in his head, his refusal to ever give up on anything. She had said he was going to be someone. She had said she was the only one who knew how far he would go. And then she had said something else. She had said, there is something my son should know. About where he came from. About why certain doors will always open for him if he knocks the right way. About a name he doesn't know he carries. Grace had held her hand. She had leaned closer. Margaret had said, his father's family. He thinks his father was nobody. He thinks I was alone. But I was not alone. I was protected. I was made to disappear for reasons that had nothing to do with shame and everything to do with money and power and a family that could not afford the complication of a son. She had said, he should know. He deserves to know. Tell him. Tell Cole. And then the monitors had changed. The nurses had moved fast. Grace had been pulled away and Margaret Cole had died at 4:47 in the morning, and Cole had been sitting in that plastic chair in the corridor, and the doctor had walked toward him with that particular terrible slowness. Nadia stopped. Callum was very still. She said, my mother kept that photograph. Margaret had it with her. It was in her personal effects. It should have gone to you, but you left the hospital before they could give it to you, and then the hospital tried to contact you and couldn't locate you, and my mother, she kept it. Not to steal. She kept it because she felt responsible for a message that had not been delivered. She spent years looking for you. Callum said, she never found me. Nadia said, not until you became Callum Voss. You were very hard to find as Cole. You had essentially erased yourself. But then you became who you are, and the first time my mother saw your photograph in a newspaper, she said she knew immediately. She said it was the eyes. He was quiet for a long time. He said, your mother. Where is she now? Nadia said, she died 2 years ago. She left everything she had found to me. All the research she had done, all the years of looking, all the information she had pieced together about Margaret Cole and the family she had been involved with and why she had been made to disappear. He said, and you've spent 2 years trying to reach me. She said, trying to reach you safely. Yes. He said, what does that mean? Safely. Nadia looked at her hands. She said, the family your mother was involved with, the family that paid her to disappear and raise you alone and never speak the name, that family is still very much alive. They are very much powerful. And they have known for approximately 4 years that someone was assembling this information. The air in the room changed. He said, they've been watching you. She said, since Lily was born. My mother was still alive then, and she had been asking questions for a long time, and someone noticed. She said they came to see her once. 2 men. Very polite. They said she should stop asking questions about things that didn't concern her. She said they looked at Lily in her crib and didn't say anything else and left, and she understood what they meant. The stillness in Callum had transformed into something else. Something colder. Something that Douglas would have recognized, the particular quality of attention he directed at problems that required solution. He said, that's why you've been running. She said, that's why I've been running. He said, for years. She said, since my mother died and I inherited what she knew and they realized I had it. He said, what exactly do you have? She reached into the duffel bag she had carried in and set on the floor beside her. She took out a folder thick, battered, held together with 2 rubber bands. She held it out. He did not take it immediately. He looked at it. He said, this is the information about my father. She said, yes. He said, I've never known anything about my father. She said, I know. Your mother kept that from you deliberately. To protect you, I think. But also because I think some part of her hoped you would never need to know. She hoped you would just be free of it. He said, but I'm not free of it. She said, no. You've been carrying it your whole life without knowing what you were carrying. And now these people, the family, his family, they're watching you too. They've been watching you for years. As long as you were just successful, just wealthy, just a businessman, they left you alone. But recently, in the last 18 months, you've been moving into sectors that affect them. Your acquisitions in the last 2 years have been, whether you know it or not, on a collision course with their interests. He said, which acquisitions? She named 3 companies, 3 industries, 3 of the strategic moves he had been most proud of, the ones that had felt right in a way he had never fully been able to articulate, the ones that had seemed to come from some instinctive knowledge of where power was held and how it flowed. He looked at her. She said, yes, the same instincts, the same understanding of those specific systems. It's not a coincidence. It's inheritance. You don't know where you come from, but it's in you, and they've noticed. He said, who are they? She said, before I tell you that, I need to understand something. I need to know that you understand what knowing this could mean, what it could do to your life, your business, your safety. He said, Nadia. She said, I'm serious. I've been living with this for 4 years and it has cost me everything. My apartment, my job, my stability, for years of my daughter's childhood spent moving from place to place. I need to know you understand the weight of it before I put it in your hands. He said, you put it in my hands the moment you gave that photograph to your daughter. She said, I know. I ran out of time. He said, then stop protecting me and tell me. She took a breath. She opened the folder. She told him. What she told him took 1 hour and 40 minutes. Douglas stood outside the closed door the entire time and did not interrupt. Patricia had taken Lily, still sleeping, wrapped in the blanket, to the guest room, which Patricia had quietly and efficiently turned into a child-appropriate space with the same terrifying competence she brought to everything. Inside the room, Callum sat across from Nadia and listened. He did not speak. He did not interrupt. He looked at the documents she placed on the table between them. Photographs, records, letters, printed articles, handwritten notes in his mother's handwriting and in Grace Holloway's handwriting and in the handwriting of a researcher Nadia had paid for a year before she ran out of money to pay anyone. He looked at all of it. He kept his face still. When she finished, he stood up and walked to the window. The city was exactly the same as it had been that morning. Same skyline, same patterns of movement, same 47 stories of distance from the street below. Nothing outside the window had changed. Everything inside the room had changed. He said, you're sure? She said, as sure as it's possible to be without a DNA test. He said, which you want me to take? She said, which I think you need to take. Yes. He said, and if it confirms what you're saying. She said, then you are the sole biological heir to one of the oldest and wealthiest private family fortunes in the country. A fortune that has been held in trust for 23 years under the legal fiction that the heir was deceased. Because your mother took their money and signed their documents and they believed she had simply raised you in complete silence and you would never know. They never imagined you would become who you are. They never imagined you would walk into their world from the outside and start, accidentally, dismantling it. He turned from the window. He said, and the man who was following you this morning. She said, they found me 3 days ago. I'd been in the city for 2 weeks. I came here to find you, to finally do what my mother spent her life trying to do. They must have tracked me through something. I thought I was careful. I wasn't careful enough. He said, but they didn't take you. She said, they wanted to scare me off. They have before. The idea of 2 polite men looking at a baby in a crib, it has worked before. This morning felt different. This morning felt like they were done being polite. He said, because you're close. She said, because I was standing 2 blocks from you with a folder full of documentation and a direct line to the one person who could blow their entire arrangement apart. The room was quiet. Lily made a small sound from somewhere down the corridor, a sleep sound, a reassurance, and both of them turned toward it instinctively, and then both of them turned back, and there was a moment of unexpected recognition in that shared instinct, in the way they had both reacted to the same signal, and it sat between them in the air, warm and unexamined. Callum said, you've been carrying this alone for 4 years. She said, "My mother carried it for 20. I got off easy." He said, "That is not what I would call getting off easy." She looked at him. She said, "I never wanted to be the one who did this. I want you to know that. I never wanted to walk into your life and turn it upside down. My mother believed your mother owed you the truth. And she felt responsible for the fact that it hadn't been delivered, and I inherited that responsibility, and for 4 years I have told myself it was the right thing, the necessary thing. But you should know I understand what I'm asking you to carry." He said, "You're not asking me to carry anything. You're handing me what's already mine." She said, "It might not feel that way, depending on what you decide to do with it." He said, "What I decide to do with it." She said, "You could walk away. File it, lock it, never act on it. The family would leave you alone. They want quiet, they don't want confrontation. They'd almost certainly accept a legal arrangement that closed the question permanently and securely." He looked at her. He said, "My mother worked 3 jobs. She cleaned other people's offices in the middle of the night so I could stay in school. She died because she couldn't afford medication that a DNA test might prove I was owed access to from the moment I was born." His voice was perfectly level. It was the levelness that was frightening. Not the anger, not the grief, the precise and utter control. He said, "I'm not walking away." She held his gaze. She said, "I know. I knew you wouldn't. I hoped you wouldn't. But I had to say it." He said, "We need to start tonight." She said, "Tonight?" He said, "They know you're here. Or they'll know soon. This building is secure. More secure than anywhere you've been in 4 years. But it only stays an advantage if we move faster than they expect. I need to get my legal team started, and I need to get a security assessment, and I need to do both before morning." She said, "Callum." He stopped. She said, "Thank you. For stopping this morning. For not just driving past." The room was very quiet. He said, "I almost didn't." She said, "I know. I was watching." He said, "You were watching from the beginning." She said, "I've been watching your motorcade route for 2 weeks, calculating the intersection, calculating when to be where. This morning was the window. I was terrified it wasn't going to work." He thought about this. He thought about the planning in it, the precision, the same precision he used himself when approaching an impossible problem. The patience of it, the years of it, the fact that this woman had taken what her mother had carried and had not given up. He said, "You are extraordinarily stubborn." She said, "Yes, I got that from my mother." He said, "I think I understand that particular inheritance." And there, finally, after everything, something shifted in his face. It was not quite a smile. It was less than a smile, but more than nothing. It was a crack in 23 years of careful stillness. An opening so small most people would have missed it. Nadia did not miss it. She had been watching his face very carefully for a very long time. The night that followed was the opposite of everything that had come before it. Where the morning had been chaos and revelation and the earthquake of everything Callum had thought was settled being suddenly and violently not settled. The night was work. Purposeful, focused, the kind of work he was best at, the kind that required everything he was and gave his mind something solid to grip. He made calls. 7 calls in the first hour, each one short and specific, each one setting something in motion. His legal team. His head of cybersecurity. A private investigator he had used twice before for matters of extreme sensitivity. A forensic genealogist whose name he had held in his files for years against the possibility of exactly this kind of situation, because Callum Voss had always known, somewhere in the deepest part of himself, that the silence around his father was not natural silence, and a man who builds things plans for the cracks. Nadia sat at his kitchen table with her folder and her laptop and her 4 years of careful documentation and worked alongside his team, feeding them information, answering questions, filling gaps. She was precise. She was organized. She had clearly been rehearsing this handoff for years. She knew exactly what she had, exactly where it was, exactly what each piece of it proved. Around midnight, one of his legal team, a woman named Sasha, who was 45 years old and had seen most things, said to Callum quietly that the documentation, if verified, was genuinely extraordinary. She said she had not seen a case like this in her career. She said quietly that the implications were significant. She used significant in the way lawyers use it, meaning enormous, meaning seismic, meaning brace yourself. Callum said he was aware. Lily woke up at 2 in the morning. Patricia heard her first and went in, and then Nadia went in and Callum stayed in the living room where he was reviewing documents, but he could hear Lily's voice through the corridor, drowsy, slightly confused, asking where Mama was, and Nadia's voice saying, I'm right here, baby, and something he had been holding very tight in his chest all day loosened by another degree. When Nadia came back to the table, he said, She's good. Nadia said, She's always good. She adapts. She's been adapting her whole life. He said, She's 4. Nadia said, I know. I wish it were different. I wish she stopped. She said, I had a plan before all this. A real life. A good job. She started to say more and stopped again. He said, What kind of job? She said, I was an architect. He looked at her. She said, I know. I know what you're thinking. He said, I'm thinking that my mother told me I was born to build things. She said, maybe it's not only about you. The quiet that followed was different from all the earlier quiets. It was not the quiet of tension or grief or careful navigation. It was something softer and more uncertain, and neither of them pushed on it, and both of them felt it. He looked back at the documents. He said, the DNA test can be expedited. 48 hours with the right lab. She said, I know someone. He said, of course you do. She almost smiled. He said, you should sleep. Both of you. You're safe here. The building security protocol is the most thorough outside of federal facilities. Nobody is coming through that door tonight. She said, I've heard that before. In 4 apartments. None of them held. He said, this is not 4 apartments. She looked around at the 47th floor and the city lights below and the kind of safety that money, real money, the kind she had never had access to, actually buys. She said, no, I suppose it's not. He said, I'll be here all night. If anything changes, I'll wake you. She said, you should sleep too. He said, I sleep 4 hours. She said, how long have you been doing that? He said, 23 years. She looked at him for a long moment. She said, Cole. The name landed in the room. It landed the way it had landed on the sidewalk that morning, weighted, intimate, carrying a whole history in 4 letters. He said, Callum. She said, I know that's what you go by. He said, it's my name. She said, it's one of your names. He looked at her. She said, I'm not going to stop calling you Callum. I wanted you to know that I know both. I know you were Cole first. I know what that cost you to leave behind. And I think you should know that someone knows. The room was so quiet. He said, go to sleep, Nadia. She went. He sat at the table for the rest of the night, in the silence and the city light, and he looked at a photograph of his mother at age 38, and he thought about things he had not let himself think about for 23 years. And by the time the sun came up, he had made a set of decisions, clear and specific, the way he made every decision, and he was ready. The 48 hours that followed moved like a current, fast, purposeful, pulling everything with it. The DNA test was conducted by a lab Nadia had used before, a forensic genetics facility with the kind of discretion that cost considerably more than a standard test and was worth every dollar. The samples were couriered. The wait began. In those 48 hours, Callum's legal team moved like a well-trained army. Sasha worked 20-hour days. 2 additional lawyers were brought in under strict confidentiality. The genealogist produced a report that Sasha described, on a call at 3 in the morning of the 2nd day, as the most thoroughly documented private lineage case she had seen in 30 years of practice. She said this carefully and professionally, and underneath her professionalism was something that sounded almost like awe. In those 48 hours, Douglas's security team identified and tracked the man who had been following Nadia. Thick-necked, professional, former private security from a firm that contracted exclusively with a small number of ultra-high-net-worth families. The kind of families who did not appear in Forbes, who did not appear anywhere, who existed in the architecture of old money and older silence. In those 48 hours, Lily Beaumont occupied the guest room and, increasingly, every other room in the apartment. She was everywhere. She asked questions about everything. She asked Douglas why he always looked like he was waiting for something bad to happen, and Douglas, who had a 12-year-old daughter of his own, said that was just his face, and Lily said he should practice a different face because it was making her nervous. She asked Patricia how she remembered everything all at once, and Patricia explained the system she used, and Lily listened with total focus and then said she was going to do that with her toys. She found the architectural models on the shelf, scale models of 3 buildings Callum had designed in his early career, before he had the resources to hire architects and the preferences had been entirely his own. and she examined them for 45 minutes, asking what each element was, why he had made each choice, what the building was for. He answered all her questions. He sat on the floor of his own apartment in his $40 million a day life and explained structural load and window placement and the logic of space to a 4-year-old who listened like it was the most important thing she had ever heard. Nadia came in from the corridor and stopped in the doorway and looked at them. He did not see her looking. She stood there for a moment in the doorway, and whatever was on her face was complicated and private, and she let herself feel it for just a moment before she put it away and came into the room. On the evening of the second day, Nadia found him on the roof terrace. He was standing at the railing looking out at the city, and she came and stood beside him, and for a while neither of them said anything, which had become surprisingly easy, the silence between them. It had the quality of a long-established thing, like a silence between people who have known each other for years rather than days. She said, "How are you doing?" He said, "I've been better." She said, "That's honest." He said, "I don't have the energy for anything other than honest right now." She said, "That's actually a gift. Most people in your position put on a performance even when nobody's watching." He said, "I learned that from my mother. She never performed, even when it cost her." She said, "She sounds like she was remarkable." He said, "She was the only remarkable person I knew until very recently." Nadia looked at the city. He said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about walking away." She said, and he said, "I'm not walking away, but I want to be precise about why. It's not the money. I have enough money for several lifetimes. It's not the power. I have enough of that too." She said, "Then what?" He said, "My mother worked 3 jobs and died at 38 because she couldn't afford $400 a month for medication. If what you've brought me is true, and I believe it's true, then there were people who could have prevented that, who had made arrangements that were supposed to account for her well-being, who failed their obligation. And they failed it quietly, and they got away with it for 23 years. His voice was still perfectly level. He said, "I am going to make sure they do not get away with it." Nadia looked at him. She said, "This is going to be a war." He said, "I know." She said, "They have resources. Not your kind of resources, but old resources, structural resources, the kind built into systems over generations." He said, "So do I." She said, "It will get public. You won't be able to keep it quiet once the legal process starts." He said, "I know." She said, "Your life as you know it will change." He said, "Nadia, my life changed on a sidewalk 2 days ago when a 4-year-old screamed my name. The city spread out below them, lit and vast." She said, "I'm sorry. For all of it. For everything this is going to cost you." He said, "Don't be. You did what your mother asked you to do. You carried something for 4 years through difficult terrain and you got it here. That's not something to be sorry for." She said, "I put Lily in the middle of it." He said, "You made the only choice that kept her safe. I know that kind of choosing, making the right call in a situation where every option costs something. You made the right call." She looked at him. She said, "You're easier to talk to than I expected." He said, "You expected me to be cold." She said, "You have a reputation." He said, "Reputations are designed." She said, "I know. I think I understand that better than most people." He looked at her, really looked, the way he had looked at the photograph that morning, searching for the thing underneath the surface. He said, "You gave up 4 years of your life to deliver a message that wasn't even originally yours to carry." She said, "Someone had to." He said, "Most people wouldn't have." She said, "My mother didn't raise most people. She raised me." He looked back at the city. He said, "Our mothers would have liked each other." It was such a simple thing to say. It was such a large thing to mean. Nadia said, "I think you're right." The DNA results came on the morning of the 3rd day. Callum was at his desk when Sasha called. He was alone in the room. He had been alone all morning by design because some things require stillness and privacy, and he had known this call was coming and he had been sitting with the knowing. Sasha said, "The results are consistent with a biological relationship to the family on all tested markers." She said more after that, percentages, degrees of certainty, what it meant legally, what the next steps were. And Callum heard all of it from a small distance, from behind the glass wall he had built around himself 23 years ago, watching the information arrive and settle. He said thank you and he ended the call. He sat for a long time. He thought about Cole. He thought about the plastic chair and the fluorescent lights and the doctor walking toward him and the moment the world cracked in two, before and after. He had spent 23 years building after into something iron and permanent, and all this time before had been waiting, patient and real, the way rivers wait underground, the way roots wait under concrete. He got up. He went to find Nadia. She was in the kitchen with Lily. They were making toast. Lily was overseeing the process with the administrative intensity she brought to all things, dictating exactly how much butter was appropriate, and when Callum appeared in the doorway they both turned, and he looked at Nadia and she looked at his face, and she knew. She said, "Confirmed?" He said, "Confirmed." Lily looked between them. She said, "Is everything okay?" Nadia crouched down and looked at her daughter and said, "Everything is okay. Everything is actually going to be okay." Lily considered this. She said, "You say everything is okay when it's not actually okay sometimes." Nadia said, "I know. But this time I mean it for real." Lily looked at her very seriously. Then she looked at Callum. She said, "You look like how my mama looks when she's been carrying something heavy for a long time and someone finally helped her put it down." The kitchen was very quiet. Callum said, "That's exactly what it is." Lily nodded. She said, "Okay." Then she went back to supervising the butter. Callum looked at Nadia over Lily's head. Nadia was already looking at him. The weeks that followed were the longest and most intense of Callum's life, and his life had contained quite a lot of long and intense. The legal process began in full. Sasha assembled a team of 8. The genealogist's report was formalized into evidentiary documentation. The DNA results were certified by a second independent lab. The case was built with the precision of a fortress. Every stone in place, every gap anticipated, every angle of attack prepared for. The family, the name he now knew, the old name, the name that appeared in the history of industries and institutions that had shaped the country he had built himself in without knowing he was walking on inherited ground, was initially silent. Then they made quiet contact through intermediaries. Then the intermediaries became lawyers. Then the lawyers became very serious lawyers. Callum's very serious lawyers were better. During this time, Nadia stayed. She had nowhere to go, practically speaking. Her apartment lease had expired and the cost of running for 4 years had depleted her savings to almost nothing, and Callum had spare rooms and security that made the alternative unconscionable. This was the practical explanation, and it was entirely true, and it also did not fully account for why. When Patricia had quietly asked her at the end of the first week if she would like assistance finding a rental, Nadia had said she would wait a bit, and Patricia had said, of course, neutrally, professionally, with absolutely no expression at all. Lily treated the apartment as her natural habitat within approximately 72 hours. She had opinions about the furniture arrangement. She had established a specific spot on the rug in front of the large window as her designated drawing location, and she defended this spot with the territorial confidence of a much larger person. She had appointed herself Douglas's unofficial advisor on facial expression improvement, and Douglas, who was 53 years old and had worked in security for 30 years and was not a man given to whimsy, had, with extreme seriousness and great personal dignity, begun to practice. Callum worked. He worked the way he had always worked, relentlessly with total focus, giving everything to the task in front of him. But something had changed in the quality of his working. There was a difference between building something because you are running from what's behind you and building something because you are building towards something ahead. He had spent 23 years doing the first. For the first time in his adult life, he was doing the second. He and Nadia talked in the evenings. After Lily was asleep and the legal calls were done and the day had exhausted itself, they sat at the kitchen table or on the roof terrace and they talked, and the talking ranged everywhere, across years and histories and cities and everything that had made them both who they were. She told him about her mother, about growing up with Grace Holloway and her extraordinary stubborn tenderness and her conviction that the right thing and the hard thing were always the same thing. He told her about Pittsburgh. He had not talked about Pittsburgh since he left it. He had not known how much he needed to. He told her about the small house in the photograph, about the flowers in the window box that his mother had planted from seeds she ordered from a catalog, 3 packets for $1. Because she wanted something beautiful and $3 was the exact amount she could spend on something beautiful that month. About the specific gold of that summer evening. About the way she laughed, head thrown back, not caring who heard. The same laugh that had not been in his life since he was 16 years old and that had been, quietly, the standard against which he had measured every room he had ever entered, finding all of them slightly less alive. Nadia listened to all of it. She said, "She sounds like someone who understood exactly what life was for." He said, "She did. I've spent 23 years trying to honor that, and I'm not sure I've gotten it right." She said, "You stopped a motorcade for a barefoot 4-year-old in an oversized yellow dress. I think you're getting it more right than you know." He said, "She had my mother's photograph." Nadia said, "You didn't know that when you stopped." He was quiet. She said, "You stopped because you stopped. Whatever was in her hand, you stopped because something in you responded to a child who needed someone to stop. You can tell yourself it was about the photograph if you want. But I was watching." He looked at his hands. They were still tonight. They had not shaken since the morning on the sidewalk. He said, "You've been watching me for a long time." She said, "I have." He said, "And what do you think?" Having watched. She was quiet for a moment. The city moved below them. Somewhere, a siren. She said, "I think you are a man who built himself out of grief and love and stubbornness, and I think those are actually the best materials available, and I think you are more your mother's son than you know." He looked at her. He said, "Nadia." She said, "Yes." He said, "I need you to know that whatever happens next, legally, financially, however this resolves, none of it is why I—" He stopped. She waited. He said, "This has nothing to do with what you brought me." She said, "I know." He said, "I want to be sure you know." She said, "Callum, I've been sitting at your kitchen table for 3 weeks. I know." The evening was warm. The city was lit below them like something out of a dream someone had worked very hard to make real. He reached across the table. She looked at his hand. She took it. 6 weeks after the motorcade stopped on the sidewalk, the legal team was ready. They filed in federal court on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, it was the biggest story in every financial publication in the country. By Tuesday evening, it was the biggest story everywhere. The headline in the morning paper read, "Billionaire Voss files claim as biological heir to Kessler fortune. Case threatens to reshape American private wealth landscape." Callum read it at his desk. He read it the way he read everything, completely carefully, once. Then he got up and went to the kitchen where Lily was eating cereal and Nadia was standing at the coffee maker, and he poured himself coffee, and Lily said, "Are we famous now?" And Nadia said, "That's not how it works exactly." And Lily said, "But are we though?" And Callum said, "Yes, actually, today we might be." Lily considered this. She said, "Okay. Can I have more cereal?" He got her more cereal. Nadia looked at him over Lily's head. She said, "How are you?" He said, "Ready." She said, "It's going to get loud." He said, "I know." She said, "They'll come at you. The press. The family's people. They'll try to rewrite everything, your past, your mother's choices, the narrative around why you are who you are." He said, "Let them try." She said, "Callum." He looked at her. She said, "It's okay to not be okay. I know that is genuinely not in your operating system, but I want you to know that if it ever decides to show up, I will not run from it." He said, "I know." She said, "How do you know?" He said, "Because you've been running toward things that scared you for 4 years. It's the only direction you know." She looked at him. He said, "Also, you took my hand on the roof terrace." She said, "I did do that." He said, "So?" She said, "So." Lily looked between them. She said, "Are you two going to do something?" They both looked at her. She said, "You're looking at each other like my friend Sophie's parents look at each other. It's very obvious." Nadia said, "Eat your cereal." Lily ate her cereal. Callum drank his coffee. Outside, 37 floors below, the street that had been quiet for 60 years of buried history began to be very loud. The case lasted 11 months. 11 months of legal filings and depositions and counterclaims and press conferences and headlines. 11 months of the family's lawyers arguing and Callum's lawyers arguing better. 11 months of documents surfacing and records being certified and a genealogy that had been deliberately obscured being slowly, painstakingly, irrefutably made clear. In those 11 months, 3 things happened that the financial press covered extensively. The first was the DNA evidence, certified by 3 independent laboratories, which established beyond any scientific dispute that Callum was the biological son of a man named Garrett Kessler, who had died 14 years ago without publicly acknowledged heirs, whose estate had been held in complex legal trust ever since. The second was the discovery, unearthed by Sasha's team in the 9th month, in records that had been buried in a legal structure specifically designed to make burial easy, of a document signed by Callum's mother 38 years ago. A document that had never been meant to be found. A document that showed very clearly what had been promised and what had been taken away, and that the $400 a month that might have kept Margaret Cole alive had been part of an arrangement that someone had quietly stopped honoring 9 years in, deciding that a woman in Pittsburgh who cleaned other people's offices at night was not worth the administrative inconvenience. This document, when it became public, changed the nature of everything. Because it was one thing to say a billionaire was the secret heir to another fortune. That was a story about money and law and the architecture of power. It was the kind of story that mattered enormously to the people inside those systems and registered as distant abstraction to most people outside them. But a mother who worked 3 jobs and died of a treatable condition because someone decided her life was an inconvenience. That was a story everyone understood. That landed in the bodies of everyone who had ever been afraid of a medical bill, everyone who had ever made a choice between medication and groceries, everyone who had ever worked 3 jobs and still not had enough. The document went everywhere. It was the thing that turned a financial story into something else. The third thing was Callum's press conference. The one he gave in the 10th month, after the legal endgame was already clear but before the settlement was formalized. He gave it in a hotel ballroom with no prepared remarks. He stood at the podium and he talked for 40 minutes about Pittsburgh, about his mother, about the small house and the flowers in the window box and the plastic chair under fluorescent lights. He talked about Cole and about Callum and what it had cost to become one and leave the other behind. He talked about what Nadia and her mother had carried for 23 years. He talked about what it meant that a nurse named Grace Holloway had held his mother's hand at the end and had felt responsible for a message that had not been delivered and had spent the rest of her life trying to make it right. He talked about Lily. He talked about a 4-year-old in a yellow dress standing on a sidewalk with a photograph and a message and the extraordinary patience of someone who understood, in a 4-year-old's way, that some things were more important than being frightened. He did not cry, but by the end, there was not a dry eye in the room. The journalists who were there said afterward that it was the most genuine thing they had seen any public figure do in decades. That it had the quality of something real in a space that was usually entirely constructed. One journalist wrote, "The man standing at the podium was not the Callum Voss of the Forbes covers. He was both less polished and infinitely more interesting. He was a person, a specific, hard one, deeply human person. And for 40 minutes, he made everyone in the room remember why those things still matter." The settlement was announced on a Thursday in the 11th month. Callum did not announce the terms, and he never did. What he did announce on the same day was the establishment of the Margaret Cole Foundation, named for his mother, funded by an initial commitment that made the news cycle briefly stop, dedicated to providing access to cardiac medication and preventive cardiac care for low-income families in communities across the country, starting with Pittsburgh. He made one other announcement that day. He was getting married. He made this announcement quietly, not in a press conference but in a brief statement released through Patricia, who released it with the serene expression of someone who has been aware of an inevitable development for quite some time and has been waiting with infinite patience for the participants to catch up. The statement said that he and Nadia Beaumont would be married in a private ceremony and that Nadia would be joining the foundation's board as its inaugural director of design and community architecture. Given her professional background and her, as the statement put it, exceptional understanding of the work, it did not say that he had proposed on the roof terrace on a Wednesday evening with the city laid out below them and Lily asleep inside, and that he had said very little, only that he understood now what he had been building toward all along, only that he was not interested in living one more day in a life that did not include her, only that she had carried something across an impossible distance and brought it home, and he intended to spend the rest of his life being the kind of home worth carrying something to. It did not say that she had said yes before he finished the sentence. It did not say that Lily, who had apparently not been asleep, appeared in the doorway at that moment in her pajamas and said, "I knew it," and then went immediately back to bed with the satisfaction of someone who has been right about something for a significant amount of time. On the first anniversary of the morning the motorcade stopped, Callum stood in the small cemetery in Pittsburgh where his mother was buried. The stone was the original stone, modest and worn, with her name and her dates. He had arranged for it to be cleaned and maintained. He had stood here once before, The day of her burial, at age 17, the day he became Callum, and not since. The morning was clear. The sky was the blue that only exists in fall, deep and particular. He stood for a long time. He thought about everything she had not known. That the boy she left sitting in the plastic chair would build things. That he would become the name she had told him to become, the somebody she had asked him to be. That her message, lost for 23 years, had found its way home in the hand of a 4-year-old in a yellow dress who had her grandmother's eyes. Grace Holloway's daughter's daughter, patient and stubborn and undeterrable, standing on a sidewalk screaming a dead man's name until the motorcade stopped. He thought about the window box with the flowers. He thought about the gold of that summer evening. He thought about the woman in the photograph, laughing with her head thrown back, her arm around a teenage boy who was trying not to smile and failing. He said out loud, though no one was near enough to hear, "I think I got it right, Mama. I think I finally got it right." The morning was very still. Behind him, at the cemetery gate, Nadia stood waiting with Lily on her hip. Lily was wearing the yellow dress, clean now and properly sized, a new one, but the same yellow because she had been specific about that. They waited. Callum stood with his mother a little longer. Then he turned and walked back toward the gate, toward the woman and the child, toward the life that had been building itself for 40 years without his knowledge. Assembled piece by piece, document by document, photograph by photograph, across decades and distances and one impossible sidewalk. And as he walked, the sun came over the trees and lit everything gold, the specific gold that only exists for about 7 minutes on certain mornings. The gold he had not seen since he was 16 years old, in front of a small house with flowers in a window box. He walked toward it. He kept walking. He did not stop. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If the story moved you, if it made you feel something real, please share it with someone you love. Subscribe for more stories like this one. And leave a comment below. What was the moment that got you? We read every single one.